My name is Sidney Icarus. My pronouns are they, them. I live and work on Wurundjeri land, west of Naarm, and I'm the principal consultant for a company called Waxwings that does multidisciplinary game consulting. Action Paths is designed for everyone. One of the things about Waxwings that I'm really committed to is breaking down the barriers between digital game designers and indie game designers and tabletop GMs and stuff like that. The reason for that is that my history is about 10 years in military, or about 7 years in the military doing multidisciplinary simulation, doing a lot of digital simulation. I was designing the like red air tactics that enemy aircraft would fly in Australia's air combat scenarios. And I also did some healthcare scenario design, which was a little bit less computerized, a little bit more low fidelity. And now I'm working in digital games, which means that I think that we should be breaking down these barriers. And so I sort of welcome everyone from whatever type of design you are, including, GMs and mega game control and stuff like that. Action paths are based on my approach to games. I'm a structuralist. That means that I use toolkits to create impact in the design that I do. I believe that how games play are a result of how games are designed. I also believe that if you want to change how players interact with games, you have to go back and change the design. I am a structuralist, though. I am also an ethnographer, which means that I view players and the act of players enculturated. They're a thing that we do that are influenced by the communities and the expectations and habits that we have as people. I treat play as a study of anthropology, not as a study of technology. The French text there, on joue un jeu, is we play a game, and this is noted in Rules of Play, Game Design Fundamentals, which is 2003 text, that French takes play and game from the same linguistic root, and they're not separate concepts, they're subsets of each other, and that's kind of how I approach play. I also just want to note that action paths is the term that's used in website design and UI flow mapping about how a customer tracks across a website. This is a separate topic. There's no interaction. So, how do players, when they're playing a game, decide how to play the game the way they do? That's really the question that we're asking here. Wouldn't be a game design talk without a Sid Meier quote. In this one, we're using a series of interesting decisions. This is what a player's decision-making process looks like. We'll go big to small. So big, they have a strategy set. A strategy set is the collection of all strategies that are available to the player at any particular time. For example, in Civilization, to stay with Sid Meier, we have 5 different victory types. We have culture, science, military, diplomacy, religion, and a bunch of other different ways to pursue them. You can go for a culture victory by racing to internet. You can go for a culture victory by getting the pyramids. Then inside that we have the selected strategy. The selected strategy is the philosophy of approach that the player currently wants to implement. So while my strategy set is every card that has ever been printed for Magic the Gathering, or every card that's legal in the format that I'm playing, my selected strategy is I have a blue-black zombie control deck. That's the thing that I've decided to pursue. Then we have the decision. The decision is the player's process of selecting what they want to do to achieve that selected strategy. So in chess, my decision is to move my knight to h3, even though that's not the end of my selected strategy. In Gears of War, my decision is whether I take cover or dash to a different space or throw a grenade. And then action is the input verbs that are delivered that generates that sort of moment-by-moment gameplay. That is, what buttons does the player push? What pieces do they move? What cards do they play? And you'll notice that the action is kind of like the verb state of the decision. It's the player enacting the decision upon the game. And different games test different parts of this process, but all of them use this, the action path. This is what we're here to talk about. How the player looks at everything in front of them, makes a decision, and decides how to play. So let's talk first about strategy sets. I said before, the strategy set is the collection of all strategies that a player understands to be available to them. We are going to today talk about strategy sets on a spectrum from large strategy set to small strategy set. That is a large number of strategies that are available to them, or versus a small number of strategies available. I mentioned that it's what the player understands, which means that a strategy set that the player doesn't know that they have access to is not included in a strategy the player doesn't know they have access to is not included in the strategy set. A large strategy set will have things like more options, more play pieces. It will have more win conditions like civilization, whereas small strategy sets will have fewer paths to victory or like less direct control for the player. Really classic example, Stellaris. It's a paradox game. It's 4X. 4X is expand, explore, exterminate, exploit. That's in the wrong order, but they're 4 different ways of interacting with the game. This game has a large strategy set because it has these 4 different ways of interacting with it. Now, in Stellaris, you have 20-odd different planets that you are colonizing, and each of them has a sort of fractal zoom-in number of choices that you have to make. But that's not the only way to do large strategy sets. This is Slipways by Beetlewing. It is an economic sci-fi exploitation game, but each planet can only have one thing built on it, but the game is about how your planets interact to create a sustainable production line kind of economy. This creates a large strategy set, not by having a large number of individual choices, but by how those choices interact with each other. The next 2 I'm sort of going to talk about in tandem. One is Battleship. The reason Battleship is an interesting thing is that there's only actually one thing a player can do, and that is put a pin in the board. But how you choose to go about that is what makes it a large strategy set. On the other hand, Guess Who? There are a really large number of things that you can do, but you're always trying to achieve the same aim. So in Battleship, where I might want to divide the board in half and do a ladder search pattern on one and a raster search on the other, that's a valid way to build a strategy. In Guess Who, I only really have one strategy, which is reduce the number of choices that I have to make, but I have a lot of ways to go about it. And that's kind of a thing. A lot of options for one play piece is roughly equal to having a few options, but for a lot of play pieces. In small strategy sets, we have Snakes and Ladders. Roll the d6, move that number. You don't really get a chance to choose, and you're not that's not 6 strategies, that's 1 strategy, because you're not meaningfully interacting with the roll of dice. Cookie clicker, you click the cookie, you get more money, you use the money to buy more cookies. It's a great game. And finally, Blackjack, like really great classic small strategy set. You can hit, stand, split, double, in like classic Spanish Blackjack or classic Spanish 21. It's like hit or stand. And that kind of makes the game interesting because you have a reduced number of strategies. Orientation to information is on a scale of well-oriented to poorly oriented. Well-oriented information allows players to synthesize the information presented to them into a predictive model. So it allows them to create a form of cause and effect narrative in their head. Well-oriented information has that better linkage between cause and effect. It has more clarity. It uses more tooltips. It uses more tutorialization. Poorly oriented information uses less. And this is not a value judgment at all. Both in terms of like 21 Blackjack being a really great game with a small strategy set, and a couple of the ones we'll talk about with poorly oriented information being really interesting games. This is not about a scale of better to worse. It's a scale of understanding the system more to understanding the system less, being able to create a better predictive model to being able to create a worse predictive model. Codenames is a well-oriented game. This is important for me to express because more information doesn't mean that you're better oriented to it. Hidden information still contributes to orientation. When I play Codenames, I understand that we have 7 cards and you have 6 cards and there's a double agent and there's civilians, and like I know the game state. I don't need to know everything to feel well oriented, to be able to create that predictive model. Minesweeper, sure, it gives you really clear information. I want to talk about The Last Guardian really quickly. This is a game that I'm quite fond of. In The Last Guardian, you play as the little dude in this picture. I think the big dude's name is Trico or something like that. And he's a pet that you, or a beast that you find and make friends with. Sony made the cause and effect between what you order Trico to do and what he does very unclear. And the reason they did that was they wanted to create a feeling that he was not a system, that he was a real animal that you could suggest things to but not order. That structure creates a setup that allows poorly oriented information to deliver a different emotional pathway to the player. Classic Mafia is great. Not only do you not know what everyone else is, you don't even kind of know what's on the table. You don't know if there's cops or doctors or whatever. Very good use of poorly oriented information to create an interesting game. I think my favorite example is Picross. The reason I love Picross is that the game gives you all of the information at the start, but you just don't know what it means. And this is where orientation to information is different to volume of information. Picross uses these numbers. So, for example, the second line along the top says 4-3. That means there's 4 blocks colored in and then 3 blocks colored in separately. When you go into Picross, you have all those numbers. But because you don't understand the relationships between them, you're not oriented enough to the game to be able to generate a predictive model of where blocks should be. You build that throughout play. So, this is action paths. We have a scale, well-oriented, poorly oriented, large strategy set, small strategy set. And in one quadrant, we put heuristic paths. In another, they're the analytic paths, ritualistic paths, and exploratory paths. This is how players play. Those 3 verbs underneath each of these paths is how players are approaching your game. Again, this isn't a value set. Ritualistic paths isn't worse because it's small and poorly oriented. Analytic paths isn't better because it's well oriented and large. They're just different. If you ever get into education theory and you want to read Cognition and Instruction by Svart and Levy, it's a 2002 text that talks about a ritual versus exploratory dyad in teaching, and it taps into this theory of like ritual participation, which suggests that like ritualistic paths are really impactful on human learning, and so we have to use them sometimes. That is the approach that I want you to go forward with this. I don't want you to be thinking about like better and worse. I just want you to be thinking about them fundamentally affecting a player differently. So let's talk about them. Quadrant 1 is the heuristic path. The player's action set is limited, so they're in a small strategy set, but they are very well oriented to the information. So what players will do in a heuristic path is to funnel that massive amount of information they have into a best known action, into like a best practice solution. And this is what's often called a first fit response, where players try to jam large numbers of information down into categories that they can execute or that they can act on. A really good example of this is blackjack. If you listen to people who play perfect blackjack, card counters, stuff like that, they will, if you ask them what the game state is, they won't say, okay, I have a king of hearts, and last round I had a queen of hearts, and that means there's less queens of hearts. And they kind of don't care. Instead, they take a 6-deck shoe, which is 312 cards, and they take that 6-deck shoe and they condense it into a single term: high, low. That's all they care about. They are contextualizing their count, the high volume of information, down into the number of actions they have. Do I bet more or do I bet less? High, bet more. Low, bet less. That's all they care about. Then they categorize their game state, which means they consolidate the information that's available to them into a known best practice. So they will say, the dealer is showing 17 and I have, or the dealer is showing 6 and I have 17, I am going to stand. That is the contextualization of a categorization of a game state down into an action that the player can perform, and then they execute that action. Now, execute is a really critical word here because players in a heuristic data set are not making decisions. Players in a heuristic path are doing a thing that they have already decided is the best thing to do in a certain situation. The skill set that is being tested in a heuristic path is, can you categorize the situation down into the best practice decision, not can you create a best practice decision. Here's a really good example. Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes is a bomb defusal simulator played through a series of puzzles. It's really well oriented. All of the puzzles are perfect information, and one of the players has a book that tells you exactly how to solve them. It has a very small strategy set. Each puzzle can only be interacted with in certain ways. For example, that big button that says press can only be pressed, held, and released. That's all you can do with that button is press, hold, and release. Top right, there are 6 wires. Those wires are cut or not cut. That's all the game's asking you to do. So what players need to do is contextualize their bomb, their experience into which problem they're facing, categorize that problem, and then execute upon what it says in the book, the known best practice approach. I'm going to show you a video of some players playing it, and we're going to sort of talk through it.
Serial. Echo Juliet 0. Golf X-Ray Niner. We got the hieroglyphs. Go. I got a puzzle piece, an A and an E, backwards N, and a backwards round.
So here you saw the player on the left with the flano contextualizing the information. We've got the hieroglyphs. As soon as he says that, the player on the right in the black shirt turns to that page, begins the categorization process. The player on the left says, we've got this list of symbols. Player on the right's looking in the book for that list of symbols. Let's watch them execute.
Round E with the umlaut over the top.
Okay, umlaut first.
Umlaut.
Puzzle piece.
Puzzle piece.
A and E.
A and E. Other one. Good to go.
Nobody made a decision there. Nobody said, this is how we should disarm this bomb based on my understanding of bombs and the patterns that I've seen. All he did was repeated what was in the book. This is this is what heuristics look like when players play them. I'm just going to give you one more shot through the maze.
Oh, all right. I got the maze. The 2 columns are the top left corner and the 4th down from the top on the left side also. And I'm also in that same spot, 4 down from the top on the left.
Up.
Cool. I just want you to watch how the player in black here, especially when we're zoomed in on him, watch how he tells the player in the flano what to do next.
Up.
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 Right.
Right.
Down.
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 Right.
Right.
Up.
Up.
He's not making decisions. He's not analyzing the situation. He's not understanding the environment that's presented in front of him. He is executing on a best practice heuristic. And that's a heuristic path. Let's talk about the next one. Analytic paths. The analytic path is where players are driven by the act of analyzing and predicting. For this reason, you want clear cause and effect, but you want that relationship to be complicated because the player's joy is going to be about unpicking that. Chess is a really good example of an analytic path game. There are too many board states for a heuristic, for a conceptual model, for a heuristic model. There are, the difference between a good chess player and a great chess player is what they call the ability to see lines. Lines are processes of play where one move demands a reaction move from another player, and they kind of interact with each other such that it ends at a known end state. But the thing is that to understand chess, there are too many board states to be able to predict every line and be able to hold them in your head. So what players actually need to do is invent a new narrative predictive model every time. That is how conceptualize is different to contextualize. Contextualize dredges up an existing predictive model. Conceptualize creates a new model. Then there's consideration. Because we don't know how this model is going to resolve, because we haven't executed it in the past, it's not heuristic, we need to weigh it up. We need to consider it. They're going to understand their options, predict forward, predict back, and the quality of a player in an analytic path is how well they can weigh up these options and how stable their predictive model is. And then finally, they're going to decide, and this is very different, that they're not executing on a known best practice model. Even in chess, they're not executing on a known best practice model. What they are doing is making a decision which version of their predictive model they would like to drive through to the end game. But chess is boring. Let's talk about Factorio. Factorio is a management sim. Look at how well it orients you to the system here. You're zoomed out. The player character is, I think, not even visible on this screen. That's how well you're able to orient to this information. Massively zoomed out. It shows you what's happening in every factory. It shows you what's happening in those little research labs. Massive action set, right? You're building these industrial machines that are like a process line, industrial production line. And your action path, what it's asking the players to do is hey, I want you to build a new narrative predictive model on what your factory is going to look like. And this is how players play it.
Which is nice. Okay, so what else do we really need to be making, right? Electrical circuits, and you make circuits with cable. So we need copper cable, which means I think we should move towards getting this copper developed into copper cable and get it moved somewhere. So I'm not sure if we want to use this area for copper for any assembly machines, because it's obviously an ore field and there's obviously better spaces to work.
See how the player's zooming out to reorient themselves to information? See how they're trying to gather more information and kind of interrogate that fiction? This is what you see in an analytic model. Players consider before they act. This player has been talking for a while about what they're going to do, but they haven't actually done anything. They haven't created anything yet.
In an ore field, so move this down, move this here. Actually, don't do that. Move this here. Give me an underground tunnel.
And this is it. This is where the player finally starts acting. That conceptualization, building that new narrative model, happens because Factorio is asking you to hold too much in your head at one time, which is why the player has to keep zooming out, has to keep checking that recipe system. Analytic games need to establish a strong field of information into the player, and that's that well-oriented system. Ritualistic. Players are usually rewarded by the act itself, and so are more interested in generating repetition than perfecting a pathway. Rituals are great for teaching specific processes. A good example of rituals are slots, right? Players have no information on whether they're engaging in a winning or losing state. It's a fundamentally unknowable mathematical model. And so they act. They spin the reels and they wait for the game to respond to their input, and then they spin the reels again. That's all they do. But because we're desperate to have control, whenever we play ritualistic games like rock, paper, scissors, people will tell you their system, right? People will say, oh, women throw scissors 48% of the time, or newbies always start with rock. That's not a system. That's a ritual. That's a prayer. The difference between a system and a ritual is whether it's a predictive model or a habit. And one of the best ways to do that is to change the information presented and see if that model changes. Just a quick one, watching some people do some rituals here.
Back in the game. $12,500 orb with a bunch of buddies. Come on, Franny. There's a will, there's a way.
So it's worth noting these players are acting every time they get a chance to. As soon as the reels settle, they just start rolling on the next one. The other thing is the guy that finishes with where there's a will, there's a way. He says that all the way through this 15-minute video. Toward the end of this, they start talking about, oh, you need to push the button. It needs your touch. These are all rituals that players build to feel like they're in control around a system. And finally, our last quadrant is the exploratory path. Players are encouraged to experiment in the exploratory path. They have a very small... they have information they are very poorly oriented to, but a large number of options with which to interact with that information to generate a cause and effect system. These games are kind of built around switching from poorly oriented to well-oriented, which is what puzzle games call like the eureka moment. Roguelites fit this path more often than not. They limit the amount of information you get. They're usually really zoomed in Enter the Gungeon. You only see the rooms that you're in, and until you enter another room, you don't know what's in there. They have massive strategy sets, huge amounts of items that all interact with the world differently. Spelunky has a ton of items that allow you to like create new pathways or climb up ropes or whatever. Steal jetpacks from the shopkeeper. The key element to the design is to create a path between testing, between trying something new, checking, being shown what the cause and effect relationship is for that, and then refining it, trying it again. And the reason that roguelike games work is because that testing and checking is fun. I think nothing expresses that more than puzzle games. This is Snakebird. It's a game where you play a snake, a bird that moves like the snake from the old like Nokia phone games. Players are really poorly oriented because the snake moves in a weird way. They don't have a generative predictive model for how to for how the bird is going to solve the level, and they have a large strategy set because there's so many different weird interactions that happen with the way that the snake's physics employ with the levels. So players move into a chess check refine cycle. Theoretically, when you start a Snakebird level, you could solve it in your head by like figuring out where the Snakebird goes. That's not what players do. Let's have a watch what players do when they start a new level.
There's a lot of levels. I'm not quite sure how many there are.
Cool. So player's in a position now where he could feasibly understand this level without moving, without acting. But he's in an exploratory pathway.
How difficult they in fact do get, but prepare for the worst.
So the first thing he does is tries to grab something, tries to grab the nearest thing and fails. Then
there's a lot of it is so easy to get stuck in this game. I'm gonna undo and go like this. No! I am stuck in my...
The player isn't solving the problem in the way that a chess player does by considering and defining their approach. He's doing it by testing and refining the approach. So let's talk about action path informed design. Explicitly, this is not a design guide. It is not a paint by numbers design guide. It is a support to iterative design decisions. Identifying the action path versus the action path that players are employing is one of my key metrics in like ethnographic playtesting. And just like a reminder that this will always be influenced by cultural motivators of play. But we've got some cool exercises. How to define a path. Players will show you the verbs that are associated with the path they're on. Have a look at what information is communicated to them and how well it's understood. This is usually via your UI. Are players making decisions or executing on habits? That is a huge question that I ask. How long are players taking between actions? Ritualistic paths are limited only by the amount of delay you give them between actions. Analytic paths, I mean, chess's top tier chess uses a 120-minute timer for the first 60 turns and then adds more on. So like, ritualistic paths are your quickest, analytic paths are your longest. How long are players taking to make decisions? Or between actions, sorry. And then finally, are players seeking new information or are they expecting information? If you watch a League of Legends player, they will check their enemy's inventory really early, and they're not looking for new information. They're not looking to see what the enemy has. They're saying, did they start Doran Shield or did they start Cloth and Potions? They have two heuristics, two categories in their head, and they're trying to find out which category is in play. They are not looking for new information. So, identifying a path. Papers, Please is a game by Lucas Pope, 2013. You play a fictional Eastern Bloc border security guard. You need to decide whether people are crossing. You assess their details. You've got some rules. The game looks like this. And your job is to decide whether someone is allowed to cross or not. And you're kind of paid by how many people cross throughout the day. So, when I'm identifying a path, I want you to have a think about which path you're looking at. When I'm identifying a path, I look at stuff like this. These are my verbs. These are the things that players are interacting with. So, I see there's only 2 outcomes, accept or deny. I'm probably thinking about a small strategy set. I see that the day's rules are accessible to the player at any time and clearly communicate what's happening. I see that the player gets immediate feedback on whether they were correct or incorrect. I see they're well oriented to their game state and the challenge is doing it against the clock. So, I think that we're probably on a heuristic path, right? We're testing the player's ability to create context and then quickly categorize the visitor into legal or illegal. Without the time crunch, this could be an analytic game, but it's not. It's heuristic. We're categorizing. And here's the other version of it. How to decide which path to use. Imagine we've been asked to help validate a company's protocol for responding to ransomware. So their IT, their PR, their operations teams, right? What path are we going to try and push players down? Have a think about it. First off, we have the expert problem. People that are experts in their field love to create new solutions. It's a huge thing in air combat. People go out to fly and they will be like, oh, I'm going to react like this to solve my immediate problem. And that's cool, but it doesn't validate protocols. It creates new protocols. This is solving versus testing, and experimenting's on the side as well. We want to funnel players toward known outcomes. We want these experts to try the protocol that has been written for them and validate it. So we're going to need to ensure they perform it. The big question then is, what design methodology do we employ to limit a player's strategy set? This is how Pandemic limits the strategy set. Do 4 actions. Your actions are only the things on this card. Nothing else. This is how a crisis team called Sentinel Resilience limits strategy set. They ask a poll. They don't say, what is the comms team going to do? Because the comms team might say, we're going to run down to IT and we're going to jump on the other side of their keyboards and we're going to hack together. Like 2 people, 1 keyboard, let's go. Instead, they say, what is your most pressing task? Pick from these 5. Limit the strategy set. These players are incredibly well oriented. Keep them out of analytics. They will invent new problems for you. What about tabletop games? UI. What does a new D&D player do? Right? They're ritualistic. They're not well oriented to the game. They do not know what they can do. So trad games give them a character sheet that says, this is your strategy set. Orient to this. Strength, you're strong. That's your strategy set is animal handling. Go handle some animals. Your strategy set is maul. Maul plus 3, 2d6 plus 3. That's your strategy set. And then your orientation is all this stuff on the right-hand side. Ideals aren't worth killing or going to war over. Orient them to the way they're meant to explore the world. This moves players out of that ritualistic, like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to start doing stuff because everyone at the table is expecting things of me. Act, pray, act, act, pray, act, act, pray, act, into contextualize, categorize, execute. I'm a fighter. I fight. This is why wizards always throw fireballs at things. They're heuristic. And this is because trad games are inherently Vancian. Things do what they say on the box, no more. Compare that to OSR sheets. Look at this bow. It doesn't say 2d6 plus 3 bludgeoning piercing damage. It just says bow. It says heavy ranged. Takes a few hands. This is a character sheet as reference. This is analytic. This is trying to give players a bigger strategy set. Look at this. This is PBTA. What's going on here? Like, this is a very, very small strategy set. Here's a real cool question. Forged in the Dark has a PBTA lineage, but their sheet's different. What action path does that put players into? While you're thinking about that, ending this presentation is really difficult for me, both because I'm over time. I understand, Patty, I love you, but also because I don't feel like I need to reinforce what action paths are. You know them by now. You've seen the names, you know the verbs, you know where you want players to be. I feel like you should have a good understanding of how to help your players get there. So instead, I'm just going to talk about games, which is what I love doing. When I was a paramedic, I was isolated due to contact exposure to infectious diseases like 4 different times. I worked during COVID. It was a big thing. During one of those, a friend of mine left me a jigsaw puzzle at my door. It was really pretty. I'll show you these pictures, these pieces, sorry, they're all made out of wood, and they're in the shape of like different cat-related things, you know, cats, butterflies, fish skeletons, little hearts. And it was given to me in this lovely box, which didn't have, of course, what the finished puzzle should look like. So I started the puzzle the way I always do, right? You've probably got a system. You step 1, turn all the pieces over. Start with the corners. Start with the edges. Make some guesses. And eventually I had to move the right-hand side to the bottom, and the left-hand side, I had like 2 pieces and they didn't connect. I thought they were going to connect and they didn't. So I had to move one over to the right-hand side and kind of just like letting the puzzle speak to me, like pick up the next piece and look at it and look at the puzzle and be like, does this fit? Where does this fit? Where should it be? And then like my favorite Simpsons joke of all time is this one. Season 9, episode 25. There's 3 people doing a jigsaw puzzle, and this lady puts a piece in at the donkey's neck, and she says, "Oh, it's a donkey." And I love that joke because I know that moment when a puzzle goes from being a collection of scattered pieces to being a picture. And for me, it was a cat. It was like this cute little cartoon cat with like a psychedelic color filter placed over it. Looked kind of like this. As that becomes clear, I stop picking up the next piece and like hoping for it to like show me where it's meant to go, and instead I would look and find the piece that belongs where I have gaps. You know, grouping them by size and color and stuff like that. As the unfilled spaces get smaller and smaller, the pieces left over get fewer, and soon I'm just like knocking them in. And in the end, there's this picture, this inquisitive little cat looking back at me. And I don't think that like my approach to jigsaws is particularly unique. You know, if the Simpsons make a joke about it, I'm probably not the first person to experience it. But the ethnographer in me, you know, on joue, we play a game. And I see this. I begin with no boundaries. I'll just turn them all over. I'll find the edges. I'll find the corners. I form those boundaries, those edges, and then I treat them as a known space and start to explore around it with that much more meaningful strategy set. Then I have a whole picture that I can conceive. I establish a predictive model. I know where the pieces are going to go. I look for the solution before I seek out or I look for the problem before I seek out the solution. And then I have remaining gaps and tools to categorize, and, I can group my solutions by size and shape. It's an experience of play. And again, this is not hierarchy. There's 1,000 ways to move from one quadrant to the other. The joke I had at the start from Dave Snowden is taxonomy, like taxidermy, both create dead, lifeless structures. We need to understand that players move between these quadrants for any number of reasons. They aren't static. They aren't boxes. They're paths that players travel along. Your role as a developer is not to shackle the player to a path, but to understand the path they want to walk on. This is like when you build a beautiful concrete strip and then 4 weeks later there's a dirt path where people have worn off the desire, the way they want it to go. Action paths aren't there to direct players. They're there to support conversations with them. Action paths aren't orders, they're verbs, they're doing words, they're the actions of play. Action paths might not help you design the game that you want to design, but it will help you understand the game that your players are going to play. Of course, action paths couldn't exist without a bunch of other people. I owe a massive debt to everyone on this slide. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people that have heard me rant in bars somewhere. If this talk is dependent on the ethnography of play, it's also dependent on the ethnography of design. Thank you very much. If anyone at Game Dunk or anyone watching this later would like to know some more information about action paths, please reach out to me. I'm always more than happy to talk about this. I did burn through a lot of time, but I also would love to open up the floor if anyone has any questions on what's going on.
We'll forgive you this time. But look, I'm just sort of scanning along in the chat, see if anyone wants to jump in with anything that they'd like to ask Sid at this juncture. Yeah, look, I know it's a topic you've been brewing on for a while, and I know that you've got a lot more sort of depth that you could explore with that one. So yeah, I think go on. Yeah.
I think if anyone wants to explore this, my suggestion is always going to be like just watch and listen to your players. Watch streamers actually. Experiment with this. Do what I did. Jump on YouTube, type in a game that you understand well, and watch a streamer play it, and watch how they talk about it, and watch how they play, and then throw it in a path and understand. And then, the second step is what do I need to change the path the streamer's on? What do I need to change in Factorio to make players explore more, or to make players run through categories, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's more or less what we're running up against there. So thanks again. Like, absolutely amazing stuff as always. And I think this is going to be another one of these talks that I'm going to have to sort of get the recording of and take thorough notes, because you've delivered thoroughly again.
Mate, thanks very much. Thanks for letting me blow through my time. I really appreciate you. I appreciate Game Dunk and everything that we do. I look forward to watching the rest of this event.